The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, slipped under the windshield wiper of a truck that had 190,000 miles on it and a crack running the full length of the passenger side window. Marcus Hale didn't even notice it at first. He was too busy carrying 2 cardboard boxes out of the building where he had worked for 11 years, the last remnants of a life he had spent every waking hour building, now reduced to a banker's box and a half-empty box of protein bars from his desk drawer. His hands were shaking. Not from the cold, though it was 31 degrees that morning in Clearfield, Pennsylvania, frost still clinging to the yellow grass in the parking lot. They were shaking because he had just watched the company he co-founded, the company he had poured his savings into, the company that bore his fingerprints on every single wall, sign over to a man named Derek Ashton, who had smiled the entire time. A slow, practiced smile. The kind that tells you the other person planned this years before you ever suspected a thing. Marcus set the boxes down on the tailgate, breathed out a cloud of steam into the gray morning air, and that's when he saw the envelope. He picked it up. His name was written on the front in blue ink, just Marcus, nothing else. Inside was a single folded page, and on it were 4 words written in handwriting he didn't recognize. You still have roots. He had no idea what that meant. He shoved it into the pocket of his flannel jacket and drove away, because what else do you do when everything has just been taken from you and your 9-year-old son is waiting for you at school expecting to be picked up by a man who still has a future? But here's the thing about that note, about those 4 words, about that falling apart truck pulling out of that parking lot with a man who had nothing left. That note was pointing toward something buried in the ground 50 miles north of that town. Something that had been waiting in the dark for over 40 years. Something that, in 8 months' time, would shake the county recorder's office, bring 2 lawyers and an appraiser scrambling to a rotting cabin at the edge of a pine forest, and hand Marcus Hale and his son the kind of justice that most people only ever see in movies. Get ready, because what was hidden inside that cabin had been hidden on purpose. And the person who hid it knew exactly who would need to find it someday. If you have ever felt like the floor disappeared under your feet without warning, if you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, been underestimated because you didn't look like success, been forced to start over when you thought starting over wasn't even an option anymore, then this story is for you. Because this is about what happens when a man who has lost everything refuses to let his son see him quit. And what happens when the thing that looks most like a punishment turns out to be the thing that saves you. Stay with this one. All the way to the end. Because the ending is the part that will stay with you. Marcus Hale grew up in Clearfield County in a house where the heat was something you earned by chopping wood before school. His father, Raymond Hale, worked at a paper mill and drove a truck on weekends and still sometimes came up short on the electric bill, but he never complained, at least not in front of Marcus and his younger sister, Donna. What Raymond Hale gave his children instead of money was a very specific kind of stubbornness. A belief that if you did good work, honest work, work that you could look at in the mirror, the world would eventually treat you accordingly. Marcus absorbed that belief the way dry wood absorbs heat. He carried it with him to community college, then to a state university where he studied mechanical engineering on scholarship and loans, graduating in 2001 with a degree, a pickup truck, and $3,000 in a savings account. He met Carla in 2003. She was funny and sharp and had a laugh that filled whatever room she was in, and for 6 years they built something together that felt solid. A small apartment in town, 2 incomes, a dog named Biscuit, and in 2007, a son they named Owen. Owen came into the world at 4:47 in the morning on a Thursday in March, and Marcus sat in that hospital chair and felt something he had never felt before, the particular terrifying joy of realizing that nothing you have ever cared about before this moment compares to this moment. He called his father from the waiting room. Raymond cried on the phone. Marcus cried too, though he'd never admit it to anyone who didn't need to know. For a while, things were good. Marcus was working as a project engineer for a manufacturing firm, doing well, getting promoted. But then 2009 arrived and took half the company's contracts with it, and Marcus was let go in the second round of layoffs, along with 43 other people. He spent 4 months job hunting, doing contract work where he could find it, and thinking. And one night, sitting at the kitchen table with a notepad and a beer, he wrote down the outline of a business plan he had been half forming in his head for 2 years, a small fabrication company that would specialize in custom agricultural equipment parts, serving the mid-sized family farms across central Pennsylvania that were always getting nickel and dimed by the big suppliers. His name for it was Hale Fabrication. He said it out loud to himself at the kitchen table and felt it land right. The problem was money. He had saved $12,000. The startup cost was closer to $40,000. He reached out to Derek Ashton, a man he had met 2 years earlier at an industry trade show in Pittsburgh, a smooth, well-dressed man in his late 30s who seemed to know everyone in the room and who had expressed genuine-sounding admiration for Marcus's engineering ideas over a very long dinner. Derek said he had investors. Derek said he believed in Marcus's concept. Derek said he would put in $25,000 for a 40% stake, and the remaining $3,000 would come from a small business loan Marcus co-signed with his father's land as collateral. Marcus shook Derek's hand and believed him completely. That was the first mistake. Not because Derek was wrong about the business. The business worked. Within 3 years, Hale Fabrication had 12 employees, a client list of 67 farms, and annual revenue of $830,000. Within 5 years, they were approaching $2 million. Marcus was the one who built it. He was the one who drove to farms in January snowstorms to fix equipment on the spot. He was the one who learned every client's name and every client's son's name and showed up early and stayed late and built the reputation that made the business real. Derek Ashton was the one who did the paperwork. And over the course of 7 years, quietly, in documents that Marcus signed without always reading every clause, because he trusted Derek, because Raymond had taught him that trust was the foundation of any real partnership, because he was busy actually running the company, Derek had been restructuring ownership. Amendment by amendment, clause by clause. Until one morning in 2016, Derek arrived at the office with a lawyer Marcus had never met and a set of documents that showed that Marcus Hale owned 22% of Hale Fabrication and Derek Ashton owned 54%, and a silent partner named Garrett Ashton, Derek's brother, owned the remaining 24%. Marcus sat at his own desk in his own company and read those numbers 4 times. "This isn't right," he said. Derek leaned back in his chair with that slow smile. "The numbers are right, Marcus. They've been right for a while. You just weren't paying attention." He wasn't wrong. And that was the worst part. By then, Carla had been gone for 2 years. The marriage had come apart the way tired things come apart, slowly and then all at once. There was no single dramatic moment, no affair, no explosion. Just 2 people who had grown in opposite directions while pretending not to notice, until one morning Carla sat down across from Marcus at the breakfast table and said, very quietly, that she needed to leave. She moved to Pittsburgh. She was civil about it, even kind. The custody arrangement gave Marcus Owen every weekday and alternating weekends, which suited Owen fine because Owen, at 9 years old, was the kind of child who needed consistency more than anything else. Same breakfast, same route to school, same bedtime, same Saturday cartoons. He was quiet and observant and deeply attached to his father in that way that children are when they sense that a parent is working very hard not to fall apart. So when Marcus drove away from the Hale Fabrication building that November morning with his 2 boxes and his cracked windshield, the thought that hit him hardest wasn't about money or justice or Derek Ashton's smile. It was about the pickup line at Clearfield Elementary at 3:15, and the fact that Owen would be standing on that sidewalk expecting his father to arrive, and his father was going to arrive, but the father who showed up was going to be a different version than the one Owen had known yesterday. Marcus arrived on time. He always did. Owen climbed into the truck and immediately asked why there were boxes in the back seat. Marcus said they were just some work things. Owen looked at him for a long moment with those dark, serious eyes and said, "Are you okay, Dad?" Marcus put the truck in drive and said, "Working on it, bud." That was true. It just didn't begin to cover the size of the problem. The immediate numbers were brutal. After Derek's legal team completed the ownership transfer, Marcus received a buyout check for his 22% stake, $97,400. That sounded like money until you subtracted the $31,000 in outstanding legal fees from his own lawyer, the $14,200 he still owed on the business loan his father had co-signed, and the $8,500 he owed in back taxes that had been deferred during the legal dispute. What remained was $43,700. In a county where a decent two-bedroom rental ran $1,100 a month, that was not enough to rebuild anything. It was enough to tread water while he figured out what came next. He and Owen moved out of the house they'd been renting, too expensive now, and into a second-floor apartment on Moshannon Street, a narrow, drafty two-bedroom that cost $780 a month and had a radiator that knocked so loudly on cold nights that Owen sometimes thought someone was trying to come in through the wall. Marcus bought Owen earplugs and told him it was the building talking. Owen was not entirely convinced but accepted this with the pragmatism of a child who has learned to choose his battles. Marcus applied for engineering positions at 12 different companies in Pennsylvania and Ohio. He heard back from 4. 2 led to interviews. Neither led to jobs. He was told in one case that they had gone with someone with more recent experience, and in the other case he was told nothing at all, which was somehow worse. He picked up contract work where he could, a machinery inspection gig that paid $28 an hour and lasted 3 weeks, a consulting job for a small manufacturing firm in State College that lasted 6 weeks and then lost its funding. He drove for a delivery service on weekends when Owen was with Carla. And then, in February, Raymond Hale died. It was a heart attack, quiet and sudden, at home on a Sunday morning. Raymond was 71 years old. He had never been sick a day in Marcus's memory, or rather, he had been sick plenty, but had never allowed anyone to acknowledge it. He was found by a neighbor who noticed the front door left open in 20-degree weather. Marcus drove the 50 miles to his father's house in the town of Belton and sat in the kitchen for a long time before he could bring himself to look at anything else. There wasn't much of an estate. Raymond had been a practical man with practical things. A 19-year-old truck, a collection of tools, a wood stove, some furniture, a modest savings account with about $6,000 in it, and 3 acres of land on the outskirts of Belton with a collapsing cabin on it that Raymond had bought at a tax auction in 1989 for reasons that Marcus had never fully understood. The land was swampy on one end, heavily wooded, bordered by a creek that flooded every spring, and home to a structure that had been, at some point, a one-room trapper's cabin, now barely standing, roof half-caved on the east side, windows gone, floor rotted through in multiple places. Raymond had never done anything with it. When Marcus was a teenager and had asked about it once, Raymond had said, simply, "That land's got history. Leave it alone." Marcus had always assumed his father meant that as a warning. Now he wasn't sure. After the estate was settled, the cabin and its 3 acres, officially listed in the county records as Parcel 7-118B, assessed tax value of $2,200, went to Marcus. His sister Donna, who had moved to Seattle a decade ago and had no interest in rural Pennsylvania, signed over her half-share without complaint. The county had assessed the land at $2,200 and had, in fact, sent a delinquency notice suggesting the back taxes of $412 needed to be paid or the parcel would go back to tax auction. Marcus paid the $412 and became the legal owner of 3 acres of swamp, pine forest, and a collapsing cabin at the edge of Belton Township. His neighbor on Moshannon Street, a retired teacher named Phyllis who had lived there for 22 years and who had developed a grandmotherly attachment to Owen, asked Marcus one afternoon what he was going to do with the property. Marcus said he didn't know. Phyllis nodded slowly and said, "Well, sometimes a burden is just a burden. And sometimes it's the thing you needed to carry." Marcus thanked her politely and went back upstairs and sat at his kitchen table and looked at the forward note he had found on his windshield in November, still tucked into the pocket of his flannel jacket. "You still have roots." He thought about his father. He thought about that land. He thought about 3 acres of nothing and $43,700 dissolving month by month and a 9-year-old boy with serious eyes who had not complained once about the apartment or the earplugs or the fact that they ate a lot of pasta now. That was when Marcus Hale made a decision that most people in his position would not have made. He decided to move to the cabin. Not because it was a good idea. Because it was the only idea that didn't cost money. It would shrink. He would spend the summer repairing the cabin himself. He had the engineering skills. He had his father's tools. He had time in the evenings and on weekends. He enrolled Owen in school in Belton for the fall semester, gave Carla a heads up about the change, and on a Thursday morning in April, Owen's spring break, They loaded the truck and drove north. The cabin was worse than he remembered. Standing in front of it with Owen beside him in the pale morning light, Marcus took a long breath of cold pine-scented air and assessed the damage with the clinical eye of someone who has learned to see problems as solvable rather than fatal, though this required some effort. The east roof section had completely given in, exposing the interior to the sky. The wooden floor was gone in the northeast corner, just bare earth below. The south-facing wall had a crack running from window to foundation. The door hung at an angle from one hinge. The stone fireplace on the north wall was intact, which was something. The creek, visible through the tree line about 60 yards east, was running high with snowmelt. "Cool," said Owen. Marcus looked at him. "You think?" Owen nodded seriously. "It's like a fort, but a real one." Marcus laughed. A real laugh, the first one in a while. He put his hand on his son's shoulder and said, "Yeah, that's exactly what it is." They set up the tent that first night inside the cabin's intact western section, with a small camp stove and sleeping bags and the knowledge that they had no running water, no electricity, and approximately one solid wall between them and the April wind. It was 38 degrees. The tent was a good one. They ate soup from a can and played 20 questions in the dark until Owen fell asleep, and Marcus lay there listening to the creek and the wind and his son's breathing and thought, "I have to make this work. Not for me. For him." And that thought, which could have felt like pressure, felt instead like bedrock. Something to push against. Something that held. The work began the next morning. Marcus had budgeted $4,200 for materials, an amount that required extraordinary frugality. He bought salvaged lumber from a reclaim yard in Belton for the floor and roof at roughly 40% of new material prices. He borrowed a nail gun from a man at the hardware store who recognized Raymond Hale's name and said without much fanfare, "Your daddy was a good man. Bring it back when you're done." He sourced roofing shingles secondhand, mixed his own mortar for the cracked foundation wall using a recipe he found in a 1974 construction manual he'd bought for $2 at a garage sale, and worked from 6 in the morning until dark most days, teaching Owen to hand him tools the way Raymond had once taught him. The days were long and physically brutal. By the end of the first week, his hands had blistered and the blisters had turned to calluses and his back ached in a way that sleep only partially fixed. The second week brought a late April frost that split a water line he had just installed. He fixed it with heat tape and a prayer and pressed on. The third week, a section of the west wall shifted overnight and he spent 2 full days shoring it up with a temporary support structure before he could continue. He kept a small notebook with his daily expenses. Every night he tallied what he had spent. The number had to stay under $4,200. It never went over $4,190. But the hardest part wasn't the physical work. It was the silence that came at the end of the day, when Owen was asleep and the camp stove was cooling and the dark outside pressed right up against the window glass, because there was no glass yet, just plastic sheeting, which tapped in the wind like a patient reminder of everything still undone. In that silence Marcus thought about Derek Ashton. About the 11 years. About his father. About the way things he had trusted had turned out not to hold. He did not let himself stay in those thoughts for long. He had learned, painfully and recently, that resentment was a tool that only cut the hand that held it. He focused on the work instead. He focused on Owen. There was one particular evening in May, a Wednesday, when it rained so hard that water came through the new roof section before the sealant had fully cured, and Marcus sat in the middle of the floor in the dark at 11 o'clock at night catching water in 2 pots and a cooking pan, completely exhausted, and something broke open in him briefly, a sound that wasn't quite crying but was in the same neighborhood, a few sharp breaths and a moment of pressing his hands over his face and sitting in the wet dark and asking no one in particular how much more there was supposed to be. Then he wiped his face. He repositioned the pots. He waited out the rain. In the morning the sky was completely clear and the creek was gold in the early light, and Owen woke up and walked outside and said, "It smells amazing out here, Dad. Like when you open a bag of dirt and it's really fresh dirt." Marcus looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, it does." What was hidden there? That was the question Marcus had been unconsciously circling for weeks without knowing it. He had been so absorbed in the work, the visible, physical, measurable work of rebuilding, that he had not yet paid any real attention to the cabin's interior beyond its structural needs. There were things pushed into corners, stacked against walls, covered in decades of dust and mouse nesting and the grime of a building that hadn't been cleaned since before Marcus graduated high school. He had been moving things out of the way mechanically, old crates, rusted tools, a pile of newspapers so old they disintegrated when he picked them up, without looking at them. He had been too tired to look. And besides, he had assumed there was nothing to look at. It was Owen who found it first. It was a Sunday afternoon in late June, 10 weeks into their stay. The cabin was functionally repaired by now, roof solid, floor complete, walls sealed, electricity run from a small generator until they could get a proper connection, water from a well that Marcus had cleaned and tested and declared safe. Marcus was outside finishing the exterior wall paint when Owen came to the door and said, in his particular careful way, "Dad, there's something under the floor." Marcus turned. "What do you mean, under the floor?" "I was cleaning the corner by the fireplace and the board moved. There's a space under it." Marcus climbed down from the ladder. The loose board was in the northeast corner, beside the fireplace, in an area where the original flooring had been partially intact and Marcus had repaired around it rather than replacing it completely. When Owen had been sweeping the corner, a chore Marcus had assigned him, the broom had caught the edge of the board and shifted it. And there was, beneath it, a gap. A deliberate gap, not a decay gap, not a settling gap, but a carved-out rectangular space about 18 inches wide, 14 inches deep, and roughly a foot below the surface of the subfloor. Marcus knelt and looked. He reached in and felt something solid. He pulled it out. It was a tin box, the kind that once held tobacco or cookies, about 8 inches wide and 5 inches tall. It was wrapped in a piece of oilcloth tied with a cord, rotted through now, coming apart when he touched it, and inside the oilcloth was a layer of waxed canvas, still intact. Marcus peeled the canvas back carefully. Inside the tin he found 3 things. He found a small leather-bound notebook, the pages brown at the edges, the handwriting faded but legible. He found a folded document, official-looking, with a blue ink seal that had dried and cracked but was still visible. And he found a small brown envelope, the kind banks used to use, with something hard and flat inside. He set them on the floor beside him. He and Owen looked at them for a moment. "What are they?" Owen asked. "I don't know yet," Marcus said. And that was completely true. He opened the notebook first. The handwriting was old, not cursive exactly, but a deliberate, tight hand that took a moment to calibrate to. The first entry was dated March 14, 1947. The writer identified himself on the first page as Elias Hale, Belton Township, Pennsylvania. Elias Hale, Marcus's grandfather's older brother, a man Marcus had heard mentioned exactly twice in his life, both times briefly, as a relative who had gone his own way and about whom Raymond had said very little. The notebook was a record. 46 pages, entries spanning from 1947 to 1961, describing in careful, methodical detail the running of a small operation that Elias had apparently been conducting from this cabin and the land around it. Not a criminal operation, the opposite. Elias Hale had been, according to his own records, a self-taught mapmaker and land surveyor who had spent the 1940s and 1950s conducting informal surveys of the surrounding county in exchange for cash and goods from local farmers who needed property boundaries clarified without paying a formal surveyor's fee. But the last 14 pages of the notebook were different. They were not records of other people's land. They were records of Elias's own land, this parcel and 4 adjacent parcels, which Elias had carefully surveyed and documented in the early 1950s after purchasing them through private agreements with their owners. The notebook described boundary lines, elevations, and one other thing, a geological notation, written in Elias's tight, careful hand, dated June 3, 1958. Seepage visible at Northeast Creek Bank. Shale layer. Sulfur smell. Consistent with formation reports from Center County, 1954. Marcus read that line 3 times. His engineering brain recognized it immediately, but he told himself to slow down. He told himself not to assume. He put the notebook down and opened the folded document. It was a deed. Or rather, it was 5 deeds, 5 separate property transfers, dated between 1951 and 1959, all bearing proper legal language and county notarization, all transferring land from various named individuals to Elias Raymond Hale of Belton Township, Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. The 5 parcels, when read together with the parcel numbers and boundary descriptions, formed a contiguous block of land. Together with the original cabin parcel, the one Marcus had inherited, the total was, as best as Marcus could work out on a rough sketch, somewhere between 40 and 50 acres. But wait, Marcus had inherited 3 acres. He had a deed to 3 acres. The county records showed 3 acres. Raymond Hale, who had bought the parcel at the 1989 tax auction, had presumably bought only what the county had listed, which meant someone at some point had lost track of the other parcels, or had deliberately allowed them to be lost track of. Marcus sat very still for a long time. Owen had gone back outside. The late afternoon light came in at a low angle through the clean windows, and the cabin smelled of new lumber and pine sap and something older underneath, something deep in the wood, the particular smell of time. Marcus opened the small brown envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper. On it was a name, a law firm name, Carver and Bellhouse, attorneys, Belton, PA, and an address. And below the address, in the same handwriting as the notebook, 6 words. These are protected. Do not sell. Marcus pressed both hands flat on the floor. He breathed. He thought of his father, Raymond, who had bought this parcel for reasons he never fully explained, who had said, "That land's got history, leave it alone," who had never sold it, never developed it, never transferred it out of the family even during the hard years, who had left it to Marcus in a will that was otherwise modest and practical in every way. Raymond had known. Maybe not the full extent of it, but he had known something. Marcus looked at the cracked tin box. He thought about the note on his windshield, "You still have roots." He didn't sleep that night. He called a lawyer in the morning. Not Derek Ashton's lawyers. Not anyone connected to his previous life. He drove to Belton's small library, used the public computer to look up property attorneys in Clearfield County, and found a name that appeared in multiple county transaction records, Patricia Alder of Alder Property Law, based in Phillipsburg, about 30 miles west. He called her office and said he needed a consultation about a property matter. The receptionist gave him an appointment for Thursday. 2 days away. Marcus spent those 2 days going back to the documents, reading them again, drawing out the parcel boundaries on graph paper, cross-referencing the deed language with what he could find in the library's records room. The parcels were real. He could find matching parcel numbers in the 1950s-era county deed books, and the notarizations bore real notary seals, some of which he was able to verify against records of active notaries in that period. But something was missing from the modern county records. 3 of the 5 parcels did not appear under the Hale name in the contemporary parcel database. They appeared to have been reassessed, reassigned, or simply dropped at some point between 1961 and the present, a gap that coincided, roughly, with Elias Hale's apparent disappearance from the county records entirely after 1961. What had happened to Elias? Where had he gone? The notebook's entries simply stopped in the spring of 1961 with no explanation. Marcus brought all of this to Patricia Alder's office on Thursday morning. He laid everything out on her desk, the notebook, the 5 deeds, the brown envelope, his own graph paper maps. She was a direct woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses on a chain and a habit of taking notes in a precise shorthand that she translated without looking up. She examined each document carefully. She said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Are you prepared for this to be complicated?" Marcus said, "I'm prepared for it to be whatever it is." She nodded. Good. Because if these deeds are what they appear to be, and if the chain of title holds through proper authentication, you are potentially the legal heir to approximately 47 acres of land in Belton Township. And that matters a great deal more than 47 acres of rural Pennsylvania would normally matter, because of where those acres are. Marcus asked where they were. Patricia Alder folded her hands on the desk and looked at him steadily. 3 of those 5 parcels are in a formation zone that was quietly optioned by a natural gas company in 2019. Marcellus Shale territory. Those 3 parcels were flagged for mineral rights extraction potential and are currently under a holding agreement with a company called Tri-State Energy Resources, pending clear title verification. She paused. They've been operating on the assumption that those parcels were county land. No individual claimant has ever come forward. But if your deeds hold up, and I want to be clear, this requires serious authentication and a title search. Those mineral rights belong to the heir of Elias Hale, which, through your grandfather's family line, could be you. Marcus said nothing. The room was very quiet. What are we talking about in terms of value? He finally asked. Patricia Alder looked at her notes. Mineral rights in active Marcellus Shale territory, in verified parcels of that size, with a current holding company already in place, I'd need a formal appraisal. But the number you're likely looking at, between land value and the mineral rights lease agreements that would transfer, is somewhere between $4 and $7 million. Probably closer to 5, based on comparable transactions I've seen. Marcus pressed his hands flat on the armrests of the chair. He thought about $780 a month rent and pasta and earplugs and the sound of water dripping into pots at 11 at night. Tell me how to prove it's real, he said. What followed was 3 months of work that Patricia Alder later described as the most complete chain of title reconstruction I've done in 20 years of property law. She brought in a document authentication specialist from Harrisburg, a man named Dr. James Overton, who had 30 years of experience with historical Pennsylvania deeds and whose assessment, delivered in a 14-page report on a Thursday afternoon in early September, was unambiguous. The 5 deeds were authentic. The notary seals were verified. The paper was consistent with mid-20th century county document stock. The language matched standard deed formats of the period. No evidence of forgery or alteration. She conducted a full title search that traced the ownership chain from the original grantors through Elias Hale and documented the gap, the point at which the parcels had been incorrectly reclassified as county land following Elias Hale's departure from the area in 1961. Elias, it turned out, had moved to Ohio and died there in 1979, unmarried and without children, leaving no will and no one who knew about the Pennsylvania land. The parcels had been quietly absorbed into county records through a combination of bureaucratic error and, in at least one case, what Patricia described in her notes as a transaction that requires further review, meaning that someone had likely taken advantage of the administrative gap. Patricia filed the formal title claim with Clearfield County in September. Marcus was present when she submitted the paperwork. He wore a flannel shirt and work boots because he had come directly from finishing the exterior trim on the cabin, and the woman behind the records counter looked at him for a moment before looking at the stack of documents Patricia placed on her desk and then looked at him again. "This is a significant filing," she said. "Yes," said Patricia. "It is." The county review took 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, Tri-State Energy Resources received notification of the pending claim. And here is where the story, which had been moving slowly and purposefully toward something, broke suddenly open. Tri-State's legal team responded within 4 days. They hired a local attorney named Gerald Bosch, the same Gerald Bosch who had, in a different professional context, handled several property transactions for Derek Ashton's real estate portfolio over the years. Marcus did not know this at first. Patricia found it when she did her standard opposing counsel background check, and she called Marcus on a Tuesday evening to tell him. "I need you to stay calm," she said. "And I need you to trust the documentation we have, because it's solid." But Derek Ashton is a minority investor in Tri-State Energy Resources. He's been one since 2021. His attorney just filed a challenge to your title claim arguing that the deeds lack continuity of possession. Marcus sat in his repaired cabin, in the amber light of the propane lamp, and felt something settle in him that was not anger, exactly, but was adjacent to it, a kind of final, clarifying recognition. Of course Derek was connected to this. Not because Derek had engineered it from the beginning, the timeline didn't support that, and the Elias Hale land had been unknown to everyone for decades. But because Derek Ashton moved toward opportunity the way water moves toward low ground, and when he found out that a former business partner had stumbled onto a valuable property claim, he had done what he always did, tried to insert himself between the value and the person it rightfully belonged to. This time he was too late. Patricia's response to the Bosch challenge was 42 pages and included the Overton authentication report, the full title search documentation, 3 expert affidavits on Marcellus Shale mineral rights law, and a separate brief addressing the continuity of possession argument that, in Patricia's words, dismantled it at the foundation. The county title examiner completed the review on November 19, exactly 1 year and 8 days after Marcus had driven away from Hale Fabrication with his 2 cardboard boxes. The ruling was in Marcus's favor. The 5 parcels were officially retitled in the name of Marcus D. Hale, legal heir to Elias Raymond Hale, effective November 19. The mineral rights to the 3 Marcellus Shale parcels were confirmed as transferred with the land title. Tri-State Energy Resources, faced with a confirmed title holder and a legally airtight claim, had 2 options: walk away from their holding agreements or negotiate a lease. They negotiated. The final lease agreement, signed in December, provided Marcus with an upfront signing payment of $1.2 million, a per-acre royalty rate that Patricia had pushed hard to maximize, and a long-term royalty structure that the appraiser estimated at a present value of approximately $3.8 million over the lease term, for a total value of just over $5 million, exactly as Patricia had estimated. Derek Ashton's challenge had cost Tri-State's legal team an estimated $80,000 in fees, generated unfavorable publicity about the company's title verification practices, and achieved nothing. Derek himself, according to a brief item in the county legal notices, the kind that most people never read, was removed from Tri-State's investor board in January, reportedly over governance concerns. Gerald Bosch submitted a billing invoice that went unpaid for 3 months before going to small claims court. Arrogance, Marcus had learned, had a consistent flaw. It assumed the other person had no foundation to stand on. It never checked for roots. Marcus did not move into a large house. He did not buy a new truck immediately, though eventually he did, a used one 4 years old with no cracks in the windshield. He paid off his business debts first, including the full amount his father had co-signed, which felt important in a way he couldn't fully articulate but which had something to do with completing a circle that Raymond had opened. He set up a college fund for Owen, fully funded, immediately, and another investment account for Owen's adulthood that was not touched. He hired a contractor to fully restore the cabin properly and build a second small structure on the property for storage and workshop space, because he had come to love that land in a way that surprised him. The smell of it in the morning, the creek sound, the way the pine trees held light in the afternoon. He stayed. He started a new engineering consulting business, small, on his own terms, with clients he chose carefully and contracts he read word for word. Within a year he had 5 steady clients and a reputation for being the kind of engineer who showed up when he said he would and fixed what he said he'd fix. He worked from a desk in the cabin, with Owen's drawings tacked on the wall beside the window and a view of the tree line and the creek. Owen turned 10 in the spring of the cabin's first full year. For his birthday, Marcus gave him a notebook, a proper bound notebook with blank pages, and a set of colored pencils because Owen had started drawing maps. Not functional maps. Imaginary ones. Islands and mountains and cities with names he invented. Owen had started this, Marcus realized, around the time he had found the tin box in the floor, as if the discovery of Elias Hale's careful surveying records had planted something in him. Marcus watched Owen sit at the kitchen table and draw on a Saturday morning, focused and serious, the colored pencils moving in precise lines, and he thought about seeds and soil. About the way some things are planted in the ground before the person who needs them is even born. About how his great-uncle Elias, a self-taught mapmaker who had died in Ohio in 1979 without knowing what he left behind, had nevertheless left something carefully documented, carefully sealed, carefully buried, as if some quiet instinct in him had understood that care and precision outlast the person who practices them. That tin box had been in the ground for over 40 years. It had survived mice and rot and water and the long indifference of decades. Because Elias had wrapped it right, documented it right, done the work right even when no one was watching, even when no reward was guaranteed, even when the world moved on and forgot him. Raymond had known to leave the land alone. Had known it had history. Had paid the taxes on it year after year. Had told Marcus, with a simplicity that Marcus had once taken for vagueness, leave it alone. It's got roots. Everything that had been taken from Marcus, 11 years of honest work, a company built from nothing, the ordinary confidence of a man who thought he understood how the world worked, all of it had pointed him, step by humiliating step, toward this land. Toward this corner. Toward a loose board in a restored floor and a boy with serious eyes who noticed things. You can steal someone's harvest, Marcus thought. But you can't steal roots. The roots are already in the ground. You just have to survive long enough to find them. On a Friday morning in December, the first real cold snap of the season, 12 degrees at dawn, the creek filmed with thin ice and the pine trees dusted with the first snow, Marcus sat on the cabin's new front step with a cup of coffee and watched Owen walk out to the tree line in his winter coat, head down, following some track or some thought, the way children do when they are working something out. The document signing had been completed the day before. The numbers were real. The account existed. The future was, for the first time in 2 years, something he could see rather than just aim at. He thought about the note. You still have roots. He had never found out who left it. He had asked around quietly. It wasn't Donna, wasn't any of Raymond's neighbors. It remained, as some things do, a clean mystery. A gift with no return address. He had kept it in the pocket of the flannel jacket. He kept it still. Owen turned at the tree line and waved back at his father. Marcus raised his coffee cup. The steam went up and disappeared into the cold, clear air. Starting over isn't the end. Sometimes starting over is the only way back to the beginning, to the thing that was yours before you knew it was yours. To the thing buried and waiting and patient in the dark, not lost, just ungathered. Not dead, just not yet found. This story, Marcus Hale's story, happened over the course of about 20 months, from one cold November morning to the next. Nobody saw it coming. The man who lost everything turned out to own something he never knew about. The person who tried to block him turned out to be the same person who had once taken what was his, arriving a second time to confirm, in the most complete way possible, that some lessons only teach themselves through their own consequences. And a 9-year-old boy with a broom and serious eyes and a habit of noticing things turned out to be the one who cracked the whole thing open. The root was always there. It just took someone who was paying attention. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of your own roots, your own slow rebuilding, your own stubbornness in the face of something that tried to take too much, leave one word in the comments right now. Just one word. Whatever word came to mind when Marcus opened that tin box. Whatever word you feel. One word. Scroll down and type it. And if you know someone who is in the middle of their own rock bottom right now, someone who is exhausted and doubting and working very hard not to let it show, send this to them. Not as a solution. As a reminder that the roots are still there. That what has been planted honestly doesn't disappear. That starting over isn't the end. Thank you for watching all the way through. If stories like this one, stories about real people, real struggle, real justice, are what bring you back here, then subscribe and stay close. Because there are more of them. And they are worth every minute. We'll see you in the next one.